Cult classics are something we are all fond of in cinema. However, real cults are a whole different story, usually filled with gruesome torture, hatred, and dictatorship. Today we are going to discuss the Anthill Kids, which fits perfectly under the description of a horrendous, brainwashing, torturous cult.
Hey listeners, thanks for joining us again. I'm Brittany.
And I'm Hallie.
And we are back once more to bring you a crazy case.
Crazy.
If you want to follow along with updates on the cases we cover, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook at The Abyss Pod. If you're listening on YouTube, make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, and the little bell notification so you are always informed when we have a new episode. Also, be sure to leave a comment, tell us your thoughts, your theories, anything you want to discuss about the cases or any questions you have. We really love to hear from you. Also, if you have any questions or suggestions about cases that you'd like us to cover or anything like that, don't hesitate to reach out. You can DM us, you can email us. There's a contact page on our website that some people use, which is really great. So any of that would be awesome. And speaking of the website, make sure to head over there if you want to see pictures, all of our sources for research and notes and all of that good stuff. And if you're feeling a little generous and want to support the show a little bit more, we do have a Patreon. You can sign up for $3 a month or whatever you like. And right now that just kind of goes to help us cover the costs of making this podcast. But in the future, we have a lot of things planned that we would like to incorporate into the Patreon and different tiers and that stuff. Also, before we get into the show, we wanted to drop a little bit of a disclaimer on this one. This episode contains some very graphic violence. Very graphic. So
including violence against children.
Yeah. So it may not be everyone's cup of tea, and that's totally fine if you want to skip this one and join us on the next one. But we'll try to kind of warn you when things get really intense. But just a note that this episode gets pretty gruesome.
Yeah, and we didn't even go into all of the gruesome events that happened during this cult's history because we thought even some of it was a little too much. So
yeah, so definitely be careful if you decide to research on your own and you're kind of squeamish or might have an issue with that. I would maybe skip this case. But without further ado, let's jump into the abyss.
Splash. The start of the Anthill Kids cult began with a man named Roch Thériault. He was born on May 16th in 1947 in Saguenay, Quebec, Canada. I don't know if I said that right. I might have butchered it. If you're from there and I did that, please forgive me. His parents were, once again, I'm going to butcher these, but Hyacinth and Perrette. That's what we're going to go with. He had 6 siblings as well. Roch and the other children had to live in an abusive situation. Their father disagrees and says that he never abused Roch, and there were never any reports from others that were concerned about him. In 7th grade, Roch ended up dropping out of school because that was the maximum grade for local school in the area. He also grew up a devoted Catholic. He would even join a group called the White Berets, which is a traditionalist Catholic group. As a side note, we read something that mentioned this group supported white supremacy and anti-Semitism, but we were not able to really verify that or even find more sources to support it. So take that for what you will, but if you have any more information about the White Berets, please shoot us a link. We're really interested and we want to be able to dive into the abyss with this, but we don't have any way of hitting the jackpot right now. Anyways, when Roch was in the White Berets, he was forced to go door to door as a kid, and he started to really hate organized religion. He began resenting the Catholic Church, and he was able to learn that he was a people person and was really skilled at manipulation. He learned that complaining was a way that he could gain sympathy and that his spirituality was attractive to other people and would make him more likable. In 1967, Roch got married to a woman named Francine Grenner, and they ended up having a baby together. Later on, they would have 2 more sons, and Roch started to get sick with stomach ulcers and digestive problems. He became obsessed with alternative medicine, as well as alcohol consumption, sexuality, and just sex in general. He started to cheat on Francine with a woman named Giselle, who will be very vital to the story. Eventually, he lost his house and he would end his marriage in 1976. Rock started taking a pretty dark plummet and he joined a Catholic social group. This didn't last long because he was kicked out for being extremely strange and recommending that new members had to wear a photo of the devil on their backs. After being kicked out, he converted to a Seventh-day Adventist, which sprung a new obsession immediately. He started to study the Old Testament and the Bible, and he followed the strict guidelines of male authority and strict nutrition. His extremist take started to really put off the Adventists, but they knew that he was good with people and that he could be useful in that way. The Adventists would use his talent for persuasion and charm for motivational speaking and anti-smoking workshops. This is how Rock started to gain a following, which would start with 11 young individuals, mostly female, and one was a nurse named Gabrielle Lavallee. The woman Rock had an affair with, Giselle, allowed them all to meet up at her house to chat and grow as a group. Giselle noticed that some of the younger girls he brought wanted his attention, and this made her really jealous. The church started to get suspicious that Rock was only interested in attention rather than religion itself, and they weren't wrong. Rock went on a hike one day in 1977 and claimed that God told him that he was the chosen one, as we say in Harry Potter. And the ground that they were on was holy. He even claimed later to have had a vision of the Jonestown Massacre before it happened, but he didn't even mention having this vision until after it happened.
Rock decided to move the commune to Quebec, and there they opened an alternative medicine clinic. After having all of his stomach problems, he became so obsessed with alternative medicine that he decided that he was qualified to administer it. He talked it up to the surrounding communities and told them he could cure any ailment. This not only brought business to the clinic, but also helped Rock amass more followers. Many of these new followers invested everything they owned into the group, giving Rock all of their money and possessions. And with more followers, Rock was soaking up all this extra attention, particularly that of the women. This ignited even more jealousy in Giselle, and she decided that she and Rock needed to get married. She proposed to him, and they married in 1978. The Adventist Church did not condone what Rock was doing and even tried to contact the families of some of the people that Rock had convinced to leave the Adventist Church. These people were so deeply entrenched in what Rock was selling that they shirked any attempt to get them out. Using his charm and persuasiveness, Rock convinced a man to bring his wife to the clinic and leave her there. The wife, Geraldine, was suffering from leukemia, but she was actually responding really well to treatments in the hospital. Despite this, Geraldine was moved into the clinic and forced onto a strict diet under the guise of curing her. Rock refused to let Geraldine's family visit her, and eventually she died. Rock told her family that he kissed her and brought her back to life, but that God wanted to take her ultimately, so he let her go. He did the same thing with other ill people, including a woman with MS who died shortly after being entrusted into Rock's care. Rock was not administering treatments, and he was not curing anyone, but he still thought he had these so-called powers and could cure people. But nonetheless, because people were dying and not getting better, a lot of his followers became a little bit suspicious. So with this, Rock knew he had to double down if he was going to retain his following and bring new people in. He started proclaiming that the end of the world was coming and that a huge war was imminent. He convinced others that his followers were the only ones that would be spared in this war. With this, membership started picking up. Some people even left their jobs and families to follow Rock. In the late 70s, he started giving motivational speeches in the community. He would talk about quitting smoking, but also sold idealist visions of a community built on equality and freedom from sin. This all sounded so good on paper, good enough that a lot of people were thoroughly convinced and decided to join him. But in reality, Rock would make members leave their faiths, their families, and make them give up all of their possessions and money. Over time, Giselle was again getting super jealous that Rock was getting all this attention from the women, and she worried about her standing with Rock. She even tried to get him to dissolve the commune. She basically went up to him and gave him an ultimatum, said that it was either her or the commune, that they really needed to go off together and just be with each other. But Rock responded to this by punching her in the mouth and locking her in her room for days. She decided she had no other choice but to stay and keep quiet, so she did. Also in 1978, the Seventh-day Adventist Church had had enough and officially voted Rock out. Being his own entity now, he really escalated his behavior to keep the group in line and together. He ended up, quote unquote, marrying each woman, and they started having babies pretty much immediately. All told, he would go on to have over 30 children. Later this same year, he moved the commune once again, this time to a place that he declared, quote, eternal mountain, end quote. Here he said the group would ride out the end of the world safely, and they even started going by the Holy Mountain Moses family. He had his followers set to work building a town while he directed them, basically sitting on his butt. He decided that they looked like ants working together, which is where the name Anthill Kids came from.
On July 6th, 1978, Rock decided that the world was going to end on February 17th in 1979, so the following year, because he said he got the message from God and that he needed to prepare. A month before the supposed rapture, there were only 16 members left, and Rock decided to dissolve all of the marriages, and Giselle ended up having a child. Rock ended up leaving his strict Adventist diet and started to eat whatever he wanted, as well as drinking himself silly. Basically, Rock was being lazy while everyone around him worked, and they would be punished if they just stopped and complained. He also decided to make all of the other people follow this strict diet that he no longer had to. He would eat whatever he had, but he struggled to feed everyone else. He relied on food donations from surrounding communities to feed his followers, and he even received messages from his followers that went as the following, quote, "Hello, Pappy. I am writing about what you said on the subject of nutrition. It is very true that I nibble, a damnable fault, which I will never again repeat. The thought of ingesting such a large quantity of food in so little time discourages me, even if I work outside the entire day without eating. I ask that you forgive me. If it is stealing, I did not realize it. It is this fault which causes my plumpness. I do not want to be a fat and plump servant. That is too ugly next to the man that you are. I don't know what to think about everything and the meaning of my actions. I only know that I will not repeat them, and I do not speak lightly. I wish to be a true servant to you, my master. Alert, vigorous, with a clear and lively spirit and well-balanced to serve you every moment of my life. I have a long way to go. Thank you, Pappy. I love you, Holga." End quote. When February rolled around and it was rapture time, nothing happened. People started questioning Rock and wondering if he was being honest and true. He covered for himself by saying that God was working on his own time and that he had simply miscalculated. Which, on a side note, in the Bible, God does not miscalculate. And when he told Moses, that something was going to happen to his stick and turn into a snake, it did it. There was no if, ands, or buts. So this is implausible, but his followers still remained true. On April 18th, 1979, police showed up to apprehend a female member who was ordered to undergo a psychological evaluation by the court, and Rock was arrested for obstruction. He received a 1-year suspended sentence, and he had to undergo an evaluation with the woman, and both of them ended up passing, surprisingly, and the woman's family was told to eventually just leave her alone. Adding this situation with the failed doomsday prediction, people became fascinated by the group, and it became a sort of tourist attraction. They received about 100 visitors daily and inducted new members through the visitors. By the 1980s, Rock had gathered 40 members, including a man named Guy Veer, who will be very important in the story in just a moment. In November of 1981, Rock had an incident where he stole firewood from loggers, and the police were called to arrest him. Rock was somehow able to steal the officer's gun, and he ordered another member of his group to hold the gun on the cop. He later said that the whole thing was a joke. Not very funny, if you ask me. Maybe it's just my taste, but not very funny. And then to make matters worse, in March, Rock was able to regain custody of 2 of his children from his first wife, Francine, after he literally just held a gun to a cop as a joke.
An article dated December 11th, 1981 recounted the remains of a toddler being found on the property on the tip of an anonymous source. The remains were those of Samuel, the 2-year-old son of 2 members, Jacques and Maurice. Both the parents and Rock were arrested along with 3 other members, including Gabrielle, the nurse, and Guy Veer, who had been one of the tourists and decided to stay. He was described as quote-unquote simple and seemed to be the anonymous source that reported the body in the first place. Several accounts were told of what happened to Samuel. Piecing the events together was super difficult, but the main story seemed to be that Guy was babysitting Samuel, and Samuel would not stop crying, which prompted Guy to beat him severely. One account states that he picked Samuel up by the throat and punched him in the face 5 or 6 times. So the next morning, Rock found Samuel and saw that he was in bad shape. His head was lolling and also his genitals were swollen. Due to the injuries, Samuel was unable to urinate, and Rock decided that he needed surgery immediately and proceeded to circumcise Samuel, but he totally botched it. Samuel died the next morning and was partially cremated and then buried. Gabrielle told a different story. She said Guy had beaten Samuel, but Samuel was only bruised, and the next day nothing else was wrong. He was totally fine, but Rock decided that he needed to be circumcised anyway, so he proceeded to circumcise Samuel using alcohol as an anesthetic. She stated the death may have been the result of alcohol poisoning. Rock put Guy on a quote-unquote trial of his own, over which Rock presided, and Rock found Guy guilty and decided that he would be castrated as punishment. He also said that this castration would cure Guy's headaches. After the castration, Guy never complained of a headache again out of fear for backlash or more of these horrible medical procedures. Also, after this incident, he was regularly threatened and physically harmed. Rock would have other members stab Guy with pins and knives and then stop them before it became fatal. He basically viewed this as a godlike act, like he was saving Guy's life at the last minute, and so he was really like the good guy, even though he was the one putting him in that situation. Some even theorized that Guy was never involved in Samuel's death at all, and it was just using him as a scapegoat after Rock botched the circumcision, and that's what really killed Samuel, and Guy never even laid a hand on him. But obviously it's hard to tell because all of these stories are different.
The group ended up being evicted, but they stayed in place for a while. Rock was still in jail. At this point, he had been charged for the incident in November 1981 with the loggers and holding the officer at gunpoint. He received 2 30-day and 2 18-day sentences for this encounter, and some smaller charges were included. For Samuel's death, the group got a plea deal after pleading guilty. Rock got 2 one-year sentences for his death and for the castration of Guy Veer. Guy was acquitted by reason of insanity, while Jacques and the man who burned the body received 6 months. 2 others received suspended sentences, and Gabrielle got 9 months in jail with 3 years probation. The group was told not to be in contact with one another unless it was for religious purposes, which was useless because they literally are a religious cult. Every time they hang out is considered a religious purpose. Ultimately, the commune was disbanded and the members stayed in apartments nearby until Rock was released, and all the children were removed from the home and placed in foster care. In June of 1983, Rock was partially released. He was allowed to leave the prison for 4 days a week until October, when he could be fully released. However, this didn't last long because he violated parole by going to a bar. Then he had to wait until February 1984 to be released again. At this point, 22 of his members were able to rejoin him, and then they all ended up moving to Burnt River, Ontario. Rock kicked off their new home with a new hierarchy. He put Maurice last and told Jacques that he could not sleep with her and that he needed to beat her if she talked back to him or to Rock. Let it be known that at this time, Maurice was pregnant. Rock was even able to convince Jacques that Maurice had a birthmark that resembled 666, and she ended up being shunned to a hut alone with her 2 children. Later on, he would allow her eldest daughter to join with the rest of the group. Rock started to force his members to shoplift as well, which was how they were able to get a lot of their supplies. He had them make special clothes that had large pockets and secret stashing areas. They were eventually caught, and the shop owners banned them from the stores in town. To make matters more difficult, they did not receive welfare like they had expected to because they were considered a family in the new area rather than an institution since, he was popping out babies with everybody. And this caused them to sink further into isolation from the community. Eventually, Rock made the members call their parents and ask for money, and if they denied to help, then he was just saying that this was a confirmation that I'm correct. Most of the parents would say that they would help if Rock was out of the picture, but this just turned up with empty pockets since there was not another option. The group decided to start calling themselves the Anthill Kids and selling fruit and pastries for money as a local business.
In October of 1984, social workers visited the commune and observed some troubling things, but nothing was really done at that time. Some of the kids had been returned from foster care, and he had had more children since then. So there were always lots of kids around, but they couldn't find anything that caused immediate alarm, I guess. They had no way of knowing the full extent of the horrors that went on. There was extreme abuse within the group at the hands or command of Rock. He had developed a serious addiction to alcohol at this point and was becoming more and more brutal with his treatment of his followers. And this is where it starts getting super graphic. So I'll put another little disclaimer here, trigger warning, and you can either find another episode or skip ahead if you need to. Much like he did for Guy, Rock would hold his own trials when he thought that members did something wrong. Generally, this resulted in the person on trial being found guilty, and the most common punishment was for them to have their genitals mutilated in some way. Members were also not allowed to have sex. They were not allowed to even speak to each other without Rock present or his permission. Punishments for any form of perceived wrongdoing were extremely gruesome. Rock told his followers that God was always watching them and would report back to Rock if they did something wrong or outside the rules. He would order the wrongdoer to be beaten with belts and hammers. Sometimes they would be suspended from the ceiling while other members assaulted and berated them. In some instances, Rock would order others to pluck hairs out one by one or cover the target of the abuse with feces. Sometimes he would make members break their own legs with sledgehammers. Members were forced to sit on hot stoves or shoot each other, and they were even made to cut off fingers and toes of each other to show loyalty. Rock would make members compete in violent gladiator-style fights, and children received these heinous punishments as well. Children were regularly sexually abused. They were forced to participate in gory blood sacrifices of goats and other animals. Some children were nailed to trees and then stabbed or had rocks thrown at them. Rock's own children were treated much better than those that he did not father. His children were allowed to eat more and generally had an easier time, while the other children were more severely malnourished and forced to literally crawl around, while others were not allowed to even associate with them. Gabrielle went so far as to kill her own baby so it wouldn't be subjected to this horrible treatment. She herself was burned and stabbed. She had 8 teeth forcibly removed, and she knew how cruel Rock could be. Rock didn't like her baby because it had a droopy eye, and Rock decided that that was a mark of the devil. So Gabrielle put the baby into a wheelbarrow and left it outside in 14-degree Fahrenheit weather. It took less than 2 hours for the baby to succumb to the cold. Rock happened to be friends with a doctor that often treated the people in the commune, and although the cause of death was super obvious, it was ruled to be SIDS. This made it so no investigation would take place, but over the following years, this and many other incidents caused the Children's Aid Society to start watching the commune a lot more closely.
Maurice was done with everything and tried to leave with her children, but was forced to leave her oldest daughter to be Rock's next wife. After Maurice left, she had to learn how to live in a normal society again. She had spent 8 years under the rules of Rock, and it was a new step in her life towards freedom. She decided to take legal action against him and attempted to regain custody. In the process of doing so, she alerted the police and had 14 children removed from the commune. It was clear that the children had endured physical, emotional, mental, and sexual abuse, as well as child neglect. 2 doctors reviewed the situation with the children and wrote a 300-page document together that concluded with them believing the kids should be returned to the commune. This is nuts. Bonanzos. Throughout the document, they praised Rock, and the judge was able to see right through this, thankfully. The judge found the information used for the report complete garbage and said that it was, quote, one of the most deplorable reports the court has ever seen, end quote. Even after this statement, the two doctors stood by their report with confidence. On a side note, one of the doctors was a professor and chief psychologist in a school. In conclusion, no one was willing to testify against Rock, so he received no charges and the children were just removed from the commune. Between 1987 and 89, 9 more children were born and promptly taken away from the home. Eventually, Rock connected with Mormon fundamentalists and other polygamists to hide the children born so that they wouldn't be taken away. Later on, Rock decided that the original mission of the cult was no longer valid, and he started telling members that they needed to be more purified and to get rid of their sins. So Rock stripped them all down and beat and whipped them as a form of purification. He got enjoyment from making others suffer, and if that wasn't clear before, it definitely is clear now. He would torch people until their skin bubbled on their back, and another time he torched a woman's stomach while she was giving birth. Rock claimed that he could heal people and would perform surgeries to prove it, such as his infamous circumcisions. Here's another disclaimer, this part's a little bit gruesome. One drunken night, he was angry and ended up throwing a hunting knife at Giselle. It sliced her thigh 3 inches deep. He told her to just go grab him a beer and then go to bed. Like, stop complaining about it. It's whatever. She did as he said, and within the next 2 hours, the wound had clotted and swollen. He reopened the wound and pressed it with a red-hot iron file inside of the wound. Then he continued to pour multiple cups of hot boiling water on her leg, and a week later, it was infected. So he ended up filling the wound with salt, olive oil, and spruce gum. After the leg had healed a little bit, she attempted to escape, but she just ended up returning back to Rock.
By the late 80s, Rock thought of himself as a great surgeon and would perform procedures on his followers. In 1988, he performed a surgery on a woman named Solange Bolliard, and she was one of his kind of unofficial wives. She had complained of an upset stomach. To cure this, Rock had laid her on the table and began punching her in the abdomen. He forced a tube of olive oil and molasses into her rectum as a makeshift enema, and then he cut open her abdomen and pulled parts of her intestines out. Although no anesthesia was used, Solange was intubated by having a tube shoved down her throat and have others blow into it. Shockingly, Solange did not survive this ordeal and died the next day. Rock was devastated by her death, even though he had directly caused it. He allegedly tried to kill himself a few times in the following days. That was, of course, until he visited a doctor. Rock told the doctor he was having dreams about Solange materializing from his semen. The doctor then told him that the most likely reason for this was that Rock was, of course, pregnant with his dead wife. Rock then had a friend officiate a marriage between him and Solange's body, and he became obsessed with resurrecting her. If you didn't think it could get more gross, it's definitely about to. He attempted this resurrection by having a hole drilled into Solange's skull and having other male members ejaculate into it. When that obviously did not bring her back to life, Rock made a necklace out of her rib bone, and he cremated her but kept some of her bone fragments in a jar, still hoping that he could resurrect her from these little pieces of her body. After this incident, Rock took the group to visit his friend Alex Joseph. Some of you might know who that is. And even Alex became extremely alarmed at how the women were being treated, and he even raised these concerns to Rock, but Rock responded by cutting off all contact with Alex after this, so he would not be questioned.
On July 26th in 1989, Rock went into a drunken rage, and almost everyone fled to the woods except for Gabrielle. Once again, we are going to give a disclaimer right here. This part is very intense. Rock ended up taking a huge knife and ordered Gabrielle to put her hand flat on the counter. He then proceeded to drive the knife through her hand and pin her to the counter. He made her stand there for nearly an hour while she bled out. Then he decided to carve into her forearm to the bone and took off her skin with a carpet knife. She was still alive. When we say bled out, that doesn't mean bled out and die. She is still alive at this point. As he was carving away, he became more and more drunk and eventually handed it off to another member to finish carving her up. He then took either a chainsaw or a cleaver. We read both, so we aren't really sure which one it really is. But he amputated her arm completely off. Gabrielle was able to get away at some point and tried to flee, but Rock was able to convince her to come back somehow. I don't know how. Her arm was heavily infected, and Rock took a sharp tool and cut off all the gangrenous part of her wound. And then he cut off Gabrielle's breast and hit her in the head with the blunt edge of the axe. She then fled again, but she passed out in the woods for a few days from the injuries. When she woke up, she stumbled back to the commune, and Rock cauterized her wound with a dirty piece of scrap metal and a torch. She then escaped again on August 16th, and she was able to get to a hospital. Gabrielle ended up filing charges with the authorities, but they dragged their feet, and it took them 3 full days to get a warrant for his arrest. By the time they got the warrant, Rock had already fled, and a manhunt had commenced. During their search of the commune, they found his journal and saw just how self-centered and egocentric his personality was. He even wrote about how he could talk to animals because, once again, he is Harry Potter. I don't understand. Eventually, the police were able to find his van near the commune, and they found him and Jacques.
Giselle ended up telling the police exactly what happened to Gabrielle. Rock was charged and received 10 years for this attack, as well as a previous incident. Jacques received 5 years, and 2 other members also received shorter sentences. Gabrielle did lay out what happened to her to the police, but never brought up the murder of Solange to them. She was scared that she would be charged for her part in that. This incident would not be brought to light until October 20th, when the remains of both Solange and, quote, a number of infants, end quote, were found on the property. Rock was charged with her murder after that. He successfully delayed the trial, saying that he needed time to find a lawyer. He even negotiated the charges down from murder 1 to murder 2. On January 18th, 1993, Rock received the incredibly light sentence of life in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years. Judge Robert Desmarius said that Rock was, quote, remorseful, eager to change, and a model prisoner, end quote. And he was even allowed conjugal visits, which resulted in him fathering yet more children. Three of his quote-unquote wives stuck around town and would visit him regularly, sticking by his side. He tried for parole in both 2000 and 2002, but both times he was rejected. In 2009, he tried to make money selling his artwork on a website called murderauction.com, but the prison wouldn't allow his artwork to leave prison grounds, so they wouldn't send it out, so this did not work. On February 26th, 2011, a fellow inmate named Gerard McDonald walked up to Rock and stabbed him in the neck. He then calmly walked up to a prison guard and handed over the shiv and told him what happened. Rock died very quickly. McDonald said that he did not like the way that Rock treated women and children, and that he was already in prison for life, so he didn't really care if he got another charge added to that. And that pretty much ended the reign of Rock Thériault. Gabrielle went on to write a book called The Allegiance of Sheep, and Rock's 2 oldest sons also wrote a book called Savage Messiah, which was eventually made into a film.
So note to self, if anyone ever asks you to join anything that's like a cult, just don't do it.
Just don't do it. Hype man. Hate the hiccups. Rapture time. Haunted feather.
Quadded. Quadded. Did I say that right? Yes.
I am. One of these days.